And we're talking, first off, about the vexed issue of student finance. I had a little survey of the young workforce in the TalkSport box tonight. Every one of them having problems already paying their student loans. Well, student loans henceforth are going to attract a higher rate of interest than was promised. At the moment, they pay less than the rate of inflation. That cap is about to be lifted, as, more importantly perhaps, is the cap on tuition fees. I opposed the introduction of tuition fees, in part because I knew they would soon zoom upwards, as indeed they did. They were tripled. I'm saying they're going to be tripled again. Vince Cable fought a rearguard action trying to defend the principle that students should not be hit with giant fees that would stop them going to university at the first place, that they perhaps ought to pay for their education, if pay for it they must, far further down the line. When he recanted this week, it became clear that the Tory partners in the coalition government, the Condem coalition, have won the argument and wait any day now for an announcement that the cap on tuition fees is going to be lifted. This will have very serious consequences. Aaron Porter, the president of the National Union of Students, says the prospect of higher fees will horrify students and their families. If the coalition government attempts to push through legislation forcing students to pay even more for their education, they will face a huge backlash. Now, Stan Collymore sagely made the point in the warm-up just before the start of the show that in Scotland that is not the case at all. I take a very simple view that higher education for our young people is an investment by the country in the future. Just like you invest in motorways and bridges and railways and other non-human infrastructure, so you have to invest in a highly qualified, highly educated younger generation. If you hope to compete with other countries in the OECD, the top flight countries in the world, then you have to have a very significant number of your young people going to university. They've got to come from all classes, and we'll be looking at the extent to which that already is not the case. But to help us through the first part of tonight's show is the very same Aaron Porter, President of the National Union of Students. Aaron, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, George.
Now, you've indicated that this prospect will horrify students and their families. Give me your 3 or 4 best points.
Well, I mean, firstly, as graduates already leaving universities with £25,000 worth of debt, we believe these proposals could see that figure rise to £40,000. But worse still, I think you're right to point out that students from the poorest backgrounds will say, actually, that's just too much debt for me, and they might decide, even if they've got the ability to go to university, that the debt's too great. The third point I would make is that if a market emerges in fees where different universities start to charge different prices, I've absolutely no confidence that the price the university charges necessarily relates to their quality, but rather it will relate to their history, their prestige,
the colour of the bricks, the colour of the bricks in their university.
You're absolutely right, and league tables are about research performance and history, not about the quality of teaching. And in fact, in some of those universities that feature at the top of our league tables, Bristol, Manchester, Cambridge, some of those students only receive 4 or 5 hours a week. And frankly, I think that would be an utter robbery to start charging those students £7,000 or £10,000 a year. And my final, and perhaps my biggest concern, is that underlying this issue, Lord Brown's report is perhaps to suggest that there will be 80% cuts to undergraduate teaching. Frankly, I think the state are about to abdicate their responsibility of teaching youngsters in universities, and that would be absolutely criminal to start passing those costs on to the graduates themselves.
Well, I asked you for your 4 best points. You gave me 4 zingers, exactly. You've got a future, my dear. We'll see you in the House of Commons soon. Now, let's go through those 4 points. You make the point, in a statement you made earlier, that these tuition fees have already been tripled, and as you've just indicated, many students don't see much for their money. 5 hours in a week in some of these top universities. How much do you think these fees are likely to increase? I'll tell you my guess. It'll not be long before places like Oxford and Cambridge, Manchester, maybe Glasgow, well, not Glasgow because Scotland's opted out, but the kind of top flight universities, they're going to be fees of around £10,000.
And perhaps more, George. I mean, we should remember that just 4 years ago, fees trebled, and Labour's majority of 161, that's twice as much as the Condem's majority at the moment, was brought to just within 5 votes. But in that time, since fees have trebled, there's been no improvement in student satisfaction with what they receive, no improvement in graduate employment, no improvement in staff-student ratios, no improvement in contact time. I don't see why, if every 5 or 6 years universities say that they need more money, that graduates should have to, dip into their pockets ever deeper just because universities claim that they need more money. Frankly, I think they need to start delivering the goods
For the money they've got, yeah.
To pay more. Quite. There is a real value for money issue with things as they stand. And I just don't see how it's acceptable that those currently in our schools thinking about going to university should have to shoulder the costs because of the savage cuts that universities are about to receive from government.
Now let's look at the class issue. It seems to me so obvious that it scarcely needs arguing. But if fees are high in the most quote-unquote prestigious universities, then the poorer the family that you come from, the less likely you are to apply and go to them.
Well, again, I think the analysis is right. What we have is a real access issue going into our most elite universities, not just from household income backgrounds, so the poorest students struggling to get into the more elite universities, but also along ethnic backgrounds as well. There are more Afro-Caribbean men at London Metropolitan University compared to the whole of the Russell Group of our top so-called 20 universities put together. I mean, we have a devastating impact. There's a devastating problem with access, and I can only see that getting worse if fees were to rise.
Now, what about this question of cuts? This Lord Brown report, when does it report, and why do you think it's going to recommend such a savage reduction in spend?
Well, we're led to believe that Lord Brown's report is going to come out in the early hours of tomorrow morning. But I think that he started off thinking about how he could bring into place a market in undergraduate provision. But actually, because of the new appetite that our coalition government have for deep cuts, he's actually seen himself trying to play a role to help the Treasury make savings. And so we believe he's going to recommend the abolition of state funding for arts, humanities and social sciences. And I think that would be one of the lowest points, and we've already had some pretty low points already from the coalition. I don't believe it's acceptable for the state to just simply walk away from funding those subjects.
Now, once upon a time, students would be revolting over all of this. Is there a danger that they'll just be revolting, sitting in the bar, crying in their beer and not doing very much about it?
Well, I've made it very clear that students and students' unions need to start making their voices heard about this issue. We have already put in place plans for a national demonstration on the 10th of November alongside the teaching union. I think it's right that we let the government know that these potential cuts are just not acceptable. But we also need to make sure that vice-chancellors and local MPs that are thinking about voting for higher fees will know that they should never expect to receive a single vote from students once again if they push through these recommendations.
Terrific. Thanks very much. Aaron Porter, President of the National Union of Students, kicking off the first of tonight's talking points, which is the imminent announcement expected for a lifting of the cap on tuition fees and, as Aaron Porter has just indicated, a pretty savage reduction in spending on our university students and their teachers.